Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 7.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a part of the Bible that I always find really interesting. I think it really gets to the heart of what it means to have, authentic faith.
Yeah.
You know, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, and I think what's so fascinating about Matthew 7 is how practical it is,
Right.
It's almost like Jesus is giving us this blueprint for how to build a life that can withstand any storm.
Okay, so let's unpack that right off the bat.
Okay.
Matthew 7 hits us with this famous line, "Judge not, that you be not judged." I'll admit, I've always found that one a little bit tricky to navigate.
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean we should never form opinions about anything?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think a lot of people grapple with. I think it's really easy to kind of take that verse out of context and think it means we should just be totally passive and never call out anything wrong. But I think what Jesus is really condemning there is hypocritical judgment. It's not about...
So it's more about checking our own motives.
Exactly.
Before we go around pointing fingers.
Exactly. It's like that image a few verses down where it says, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." It's kind of like saying, hey, before we go around trying to fix everybody else, we need to take a good hard look in the mirror and see what's going on in our own lives.
Right. Yeah, that's such a powerful image. But so how do we differentiate between that kind of judgment and what you called earlier, like righteous judgment? Is there a way to kind of discern right from wrong without becoming like self-righteous know-it-alls?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the answer is absolutely. Righteous judgment, I don't think, is about being harsh or condemning,
Right.
It's about using wisdom and discernment and compassion to make choices that are aligned with God's principles, It's about seeking truth and then living in a way that reflects that truth.
So it's less about, pointing out other people's flaws and more about just making sure that our own lives are in order first.
Yes. And I think it's an ongoing process, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to fall short.
Right.
But righteous judgment is about striving to live in a way that honors God and loves others well.
It makes you think about all those times where you've been really quick to judge someone else.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's a friend who made a bad decision or a coworker who messed up on a project. I mean, how often are those snap judgments really more about our own insecurities than anything else?
That's so true. And that actually leads us really well into the next section of Matthew 7.
Okay.
Where Jesus talks about prayer.
Oh, right.
Ask, seek, knock.
Those 3 words.
Right.
They pack a punch.
They really do. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. It's this incredible image of persistent prayer.
Right.
Jesus isn't saying hey, just casually mention your needs to God and then move on with your day.
Right.
It's this relentless pursuit, like knocking on heaven's door until it swings wide open.
I've always been struck by the energy of that passage. It feels so bold. It's almost like Jesus is saying, don't be shy. Come boldly before God with your desires and your longings, your questions, and don't give up easy.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it does require a certain level of trust, right? Trust that keeps us knocking even when we don't see immediate results.
Right. So it's less about getting what we want and more about just cultivating that deeper, more intimate relationship with God where we can just bring our whole selves before Him.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, the messy.
You hit the nail on the head, I think it's about developing a heart that is persistently seeking God's will and presence in our lives, even when we don't understand the why or the when of His answers.
That makes me think about how often I give up on things too quickly. If I don't see progress right away, whether it's a personal goal or a creative project, or even, praying for something, that's important to me. I tend to lose interest. But this passage is a good reminder that maybe the breakthrough comes right after the moment that we're tempted to throw in the towel.
I love that. And what if we applied that same relentless pursuit to our spiritual lives? What if we approached our prayer lives with the same tenacity that we bring to the other challenges that we face? Imagine the transformation that could take place.
It's a challenge, but a good one. And speaking of challenges, let's talk about those 2 very different paths that Jesus describes, the wide gate and the narrow gate.
Ah, yes. The wide gate and the spacious road leading to destruction versus the narrow gate and the difficult road leading to life. It's such a vivid image, you know. It's so thought-provoking.
It is, and I think it speaks to something that we all experience. There's always that temptation to choose the easy path, the path of least resistance, even when we know deep down it's not going to really lead us where we truly want to go.
It's like that saying, the easy road often leads to a hard life. And I think we see that played out all the time in our culture, don't we? Like the pursuit of instant gratification or the desire for wealth and status above all else, or just that constant craving for comfort and ease.
Right.
I mean, those are all wide gates that kind of promise happiness, but ultimately lead to emptiness.
That's true. And, in contrast, the narrow gate, the path that leads to life, often involves sacrifice and discipline and going against the grain. It requires us to make tough choices, to say no to things that might be pleasurable in the moment, but are ultimately really detrimental to our well-being.
It's about choosing what's truly good and life-giving,
Right.
even when it's difficult or unpopular. And that can be a lonely road sometimes.
And I think that's what makes this passage so challenging,
Yeah.
It's a reminder that following Jesus isn't always going to be easy or comfortable.
Right.
It's going to require us to make hard choices, to stand firm in our convictions, even when the world is kind of pulling us in a different direction.
That's a great point. And, this concept of choosing the right path actually leads us directly into the next warning that Jesus gives in Matthew 7. And that's the warning about false prophets. He
Right.
says, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. And this feels especially relevant in our world today,
Oh my gosh, yes.
where we're bombarded with information.
From all sides.
From every direction. It's like trying to navigate a minefield of misinformation and opinions, masquerading as facts and influencers, pushing agendas.
Right. How do we even begin to sort through it all and discern what's true?
Well, Jesus gives us a really practical tip. He says, by their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles?
So it's not just about what people say, but about how they live.
Exactly.
We need to look beyond the smooth talk and the charisma,
Right.
and actually pay attention to their actions.
Yeah, it's about looking for that consistency between someone's words and their deeds, Do their actions align with their claims? Do they demonstrate integrity and compassion and a genuine desire to serve others? Or are they motivated by self-interest or power or greed?
It's a sobering thought, especially when you consider how easily we can be swayed by appearances or persuasive arguments. But it's such a crucial skill to develop in our world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Like being able to look past the surface and discern the true nature of things.
Absolutely. And I think it's not just about spotting false prophets in the, religious sense.
Right.
This principle, I think, applies to all areas of life. Whether we're evaluating a news source or a potential business partner or even a new friend.
Right.
We need to be discerning. We need to ask ourselves, what are the fruits of this person or of this organization?
Right.
What impact are they having on the world around them?
So we've talked about judging others. We've talked about persistent prayer. We've talked about choosing the right path and discerning truth. What else does Jesus have for us in this chapter?
Well, he goes on to talk about the difference between true disciples and those who just simply profess faith but don't live it out. And this one hits hard,
Okay.
Matthew 7:21 to 23, where Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven.
It's a stark reminder that authentic faith isn't just about saying the right things. It's about doing them.
Exactly. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that just because we believe certain things or we attend religious services or we post inspirational quotes on social media, that we're good to go.
Right.
But Jesus is calling for something so much deeper, something more radical. He's calling for a faith that transforms our lives from the inside out.
It's like saying, show me your faith without the words, and I'll show you my faith by my actions.
I love that it's about moving beyond empty words to tangible actions. It's about letting our faith actually inform our choices and our relationships and the way that we interact with the world around us.
So it's not enough to just believe in God. We need to live out that belief in practical ways.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our beliefs, about letting our faith be the driving force behind everything that we do.
It makes you wonder, what does that look like practically? How do we translate those beliefs into actions?
That's a great question. And, I think the answer might just lie in the final teaching that Jesus shares in this chapter, and that's the parable of the wise and foolish builders.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. The wise builder builds his house on the rock, while the foolish builder builds his house on the sand.
And when the storms come, because they always come,
Right.
only the house that's built on the solid foundation of rock is going to be able to withstand the wind and the rain. It's such a powerful metaphor for the choices that we make in life.
It is. So how do we apply this parable to our everyday lives? How do we build on the rock, so to speak, and not on the shifting sands of temporary things?
Let's delve a little deeper into that parable of the wise and foolish builders. It's a story that's resonated, I think, across cultures and time.
It really has.
The imagery is so simple, yet so profound.
Yeah, it is. And I think it gets to the heart of what we were talking about earlier, like building our lives on a solid foundation. But what does that rock actually represent in practical terms?
Right.
Like, it's easy to say, build on Jesus, but what does that actually look like day to day?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think at its core, it's about aligning our lives with the teachings and example of Jesus, It's about making his words and his ways the foundation of everything that we do.
So it's not just about believing in him intellectually.
Right.
It's about letting that belief shape our actions, our choices, our relationships.
Exactly. Everything. It's about making a conscious decision to build our lives on something that's eternal, on something that's unshakable. And that's what Jesus offers,
Right.
He is the rock that can withstand any storm.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's get really specific.
Yeah.
You mentioned storms earlier. What are some of the storms that might test our foundation in today's world?
Well, I think we live in a world that's constantly bombarding us with messages that kind of contradict the teachings of Jesus, messages that tell us to prioritize wealth and status and to seek instant gratification and to look out for ourselves above all else. Those are the shifting sands that can really easily erode our foundation if we're not careful.
So those external pressures like the cultural norms or the media or just the constant striving for more, those are all storms in a sense.
Absolutely. I think they can be incredibly powerful forces that pull us away from what truly matters. But, it's not just external pressures. Internal storms, I think, can be just as devastating.
What do you mean by internal storms?
Well, I think about the things that shake us to our core horror. Doubts and fears, anxieties, insecurities, past hurts, the temptation to give in to unhealthy habits. Those are all internal storms that can threaten to tear down the house that we're building.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. So whether it's external pressure from the world around us or those internal struggles that I think we all face, those are the storms that are going to reveal what our foundation is truly made of.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of testing that we discover whether we've built on something solid or on something fleeting.
So how do we ensure that we're building on the rock? What are some practical steps we can take to kind of strengthen our foundation, so to speak?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's about staying connected to the source of our strength. It's about cultivating a deep and abiding relationship with Jesus through prayer, through studying his word, through seeking out a community of faith that can support us on our journey.
So it's like we're constantly replenishing our building materials, making sure we have that steady supply of the rock to keep our foundation strong.
That's a great analogy. I love that, we need to be intentional about feeding our souls with truth, with love, with hope. We need to surround ourselves with people who will encourage us and challenge us to grow in our faith.
That makes sense. And I think it also speaks to the importance of humility.
Yes.
Right? Recognizing that we can't do this alone.
Yeah.
We need each other. We need the support of a community. And most importantly, we need God's grace to help us through the tough times.
Absolutely. Humility is essential. It's about acknowledging our weaknesses, our limitations, our need for God's guidance and strength.
Okay, so we need to stay connected to God.
Yeah.
We need to surround ourselves with supportive people. We need to cultivate humility. What else?
Another crucial step, I think, is to be discerning about what we allow into our lives.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about earlier with the false prophets? We need to be so careful about the messages that we're consuming, the voices that we're listening to, the influences that we're allowing to shape our thoughts and beliefs.
So it's like being mindful of the building materials that we're using.
Yes.
Are we choosing quality materials that will stand the test of time? Or are we settling for kind of cheap substitutes that are going to crumble under pressure?
Exactly. Are we feeding our minds with truth, with beauty, with things that inspire us to become better versions of ourselves? Or are we filling our lives with negativity with gossip, with things that just drain our energy and pull us down.
That's a great point. It's like we're curating the environment that we live in, both physically and mentally. We want to create a space that's conducive to growth, to peace, to flourishing.
Yes, and that requires intentionality. It requires making choices about what we prioritize, about what we invest our time and energy in.
It's about being mindful of the inputs, because those inputs are ultimately going to shape the outputs.
Right.
Right? If we're constantly feeding ourselves a diet of junk food, both literally and figuratively,
Yeah.
it's going to show up in our lives in one way or another.
That's so true. And just like we need to be discerning about what we consume, we also need to be really intentional about what we create.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. The wise builder didn't just sit around admiring the rock, you know?
Right.
He took action. He used his skills and his resources and his creativity to build something beautiful and enduring. And in the same way, I think we're called to be creators, not just consumers.
So it's not enough to just absorb information or listen to sermons or read inspiring books.
Right.
We need to put that knowledge into practice.
Yeah.
We need to build something with it.
We need to use our gifts, our talents, our resources to make a difference in the world around us. Whether it's through our work or our relationships or our creative endeavors or our acts of service, we're called to be builders.
That's a beautiful thought. So building on the rock isn't just about personal growth or spiritual development. It's also about contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely. It's about using what we've been given to make the world a better place, to bring hope and healing and beauty to the brokenness around us.
It's like we're all part of this grand construction project. And each of us has a role to play. We're all called to be builders, to use our unique gifts and talents to create something lasting and meaningful. Right? Thinking about your life right now, what's one change that you could make today to ensure that you're building on a solid foundation?
It's a question I think worth pondering. You know, is there an area where you need to surrender to God's will more fully, or a relationship that needs mending, or a habit that's holding you back from experiencing true freedom?
Or maybe it's about deepening your commitment to studying scripture or to prayer, or to finding a community of faith that can support you on your journey.
Whatever it is, let this be a catalyst for positive change. You know, a step towards building a life that's grounded in truth and filled with purpose and able to weather any storm.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
You know, from judging others to persistent prayer, choosing the right path, discerning truth,
It's been quite a journey.
and building our lives on a solid foundation. What one change could you make today
Right.
to ensure that you are building on a solid foundation?
Yes, and I think that question really gets to the heart of what Jesus is calling us to in this chapter. It's not just about listening to a podcast or reading a passage of scripture and feeling all inspired, you know. It's about actually taking action. It's about making choices that actually reflect the truths that we're learning.
I love that it's about moving from head knowledge to heart transformation.
Yes.
It's about letting those truths really sink deep down into our souls and then allowing them to shape the way that we live.
And you know, I think that's where grace comes in.
Right.
Because we're going to mess up.
Yeah.
We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short of the ideal.
Right.
But God's grace is always there, you know, to pick us up and dust us off and help us get back on track.
That is so encouraging. It's not about striving for perfection. It's about surrendering to the process of transformation,
Yes.
knowing that God is with us every step of the way.
Yes. And I think that's what makes this journey so exciting. You know, it's an adventure. It's a process of discovery. It's about learning and growing and becoming more like Christ each and every day.
And it's not a solo mission, is it?
Absolutely not. We need each other. We need the support of a community. We need people who will encourage us and challenge us and hold us accountable.
And I think that's something that's so often missing in our culture today. We're so individualistic,
Yeah.
so focused on our own goals and aspirations that we forget the power of community.
It's so true. But, you know, when we connect with others who share our values, who are also seeking to build their lives on a solid foundation, it creates this incredible synergy. You know, we can lift each other up, we can support each other through the tough times, and we can celebrate each other's victories.
It's like that old African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I love that.
We need each other to stay the course, to keep building, to keep growing.
And that brings me to kind of a final thought that I wanted to leave our listeners with.
Okay.
We've talked about building our lives on the rock, on that solid foundation of Christ.
Right.
But it's important to remember that it's not just about building our own little houses.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. It's about building something bigger, something that extends beyond ourselves.
Exactly. It's about building the kingdom of God. It's about partnering with God to bring his love and his justice and his peace to the world around us.
That's a beautiful vision, and it gives our individual efforts so much more purpose and meaning.
It's no longer just about our own personal growth or happiness, you know? It's
Right.
about being a part of something so much larger than ourselves, something that will have a ripple effect for generations to come.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
I want to challenge our listeners to think about the impact that they want to make on the world. What legacy do you want to leave behind? What kind of world do you want to create for your children and your grandchildren?
And remember, you know, building the kingdom of God isn't about these grand gestures or heroic feats.
Right.
It's about the small, everyday choices that we make, you know? It's about how we treat our families and our neighbors and the stranger on the street.
Right.
It's about the kindness that we extend, the forgiveness that we offer, the love that we share.
It's about those seemingly insignificant acts that, when multiplied by millions of people, can truly change the world.
Exactly. So let's go out there and be builders. Let's build lives of integrity and compassion and purpose. Let's build communities of love and support, and let's work together to build a world that reflects the heart of God.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Matthew 7. We hope you've been inspired and challenged to build your life on a solid foundation and to make a difference in the world around you. Until next time, keep seeking, keep knocking, keep building, and keep the conversation going.